I think we're live. Um, hey everyone, I thought I was gonna take a break from reading political philosophy or really anything to do with politics in general. It's just thinking about it has made me depressed and quite cynical. So I've been trying to resign from anything political that involves reading political philosophy, but and I just felt like I need to focus more on my thesis, my master's for very practical reasons, but also somewhat of existential reasons, given, at least in my opinion, the morbid state of our world right now. Be that as it may, I think I couldn't resist to make this video or do this live stream uh, on a book that I'm reading recently. This book called Comrade by Jodi, a very short political essay, an essay on political belonging by Jodi. And I'm reading this, in fact, on recommendation by the superlative Daniel Todd. I'll be having him on the podcast next month, discuss the idea of comradeship and what it means to be a comrade. And there was this one section in the book, right at the outset, in fact, called "Survivors and Systems," and I read that part, I think, last week, and since then I've been thinking about that section pretty much the whole week. And today I just felt compelled to just, in fact, pay for StreamYard just to go and do a live stream, just so that I can discuss and read out that section. And the good thing is, in fact, I probably should get that into. The good thing is, there was even a PDF that I found online, which, let me set it up right here. Let me see if I could share my screen. Present, share screen. Yeah, all right, cool. One is a window. There we go. Share. And add that to stage. I think it's a screen now. Yeah. So the good thing is I found a PDF online of the exact section that I was reading, called "Survivors and Systems." So the good thing is I could read along with you all. And it's I don't know, it just spoke to me quite deeply. I felt like, first of all, excellent read. And Jodi is just a very clear writer, unlike some people in theory. And this part in particular, I'm so glad Daniel Todd recommended this book. I mean, it's been really useful for me, especially given how cynical I've gotten about politics and all of that. This part really, I felt, just perfectly captured our current state. And even though I'm not going to read, obviously, the whole book here, the kind of the descriptive analysis she does at the outset of the book, later on, she revisits why the idea of a comrade is or what it means to be a comrade against this idea of survivors and systems, which we'll get to in a bit. And I just wanted to read that out and just see, kind of discuss some of the thoughts I've had, and kind of, I guess, do a sort of a book study by myself here, unless anyone else joins later. So let me just start. I mean, it goes like this: Survivors and Systems. Jodi writes, "This book offers a theory of the comrade as a figure for the political relation between those on the same side." That's a very important point too. I mean, later on, I think in chapter 3 or 4, she really touches on this notion of what it means to be, what's the sameness involved in the comrade. And to put it really simply, it is the only real universal sameness is this notion of political struggle. It's a very generic sameness that goes beyond identity and beyond any kind of nationalism, any kind of the current things that seem to really capture the political consciousness of most people. And then, let me see if I could zoom in a bit. Yeah, Jodi writes, it contrasts with two opposing tendencies dominant in contemporary left theory and activism: tendencies that emphasize survivors and systems. So this is the really important bit here, which I kind of want to discuss. The emphasis on survivors appears in social media, academic environments, and some activist networks. It is voiced through intense attachment to identity. That's what you would call identity politics, I guess, and appeals to allyship, as I explore below. The emphasis on systems predominates in aesthetics, conceptual venues as a post-humanist concern with geology, extension, algorithms, hyperobjects, biosystems, and planetary exhaustion. So on the one side, we have survivors, those with nothing left to cling but their identities, but identities forged through struggles to survive and attached to the pain and trauma of these struggles. So that's an important point here, right? I mean, I think now it's quite common. Most people are against identity politics, apart from like the weird, I'd call them corporate liberal. But most people, right, left, wherever you are on the political spectrum, people just aren't a fan of identity politics, except we also have a resurgence of nationalism, which is a form of identity politics. For the people that partake in nationalism, or even, in the worst extreme cases, white nationalism, they wouldn't consider themselves to be involved in identity politics. They would just think that they're being patriotic or fighting for their nation or whatever. But at least the term identity politics, what it stands for, I don't think anyone really buys into it anymore. But what I find interesting here is Jodi Dean presents survivors, or like surviving, as a form of identity. And I mean, we'll get to it that in a bit. And where, like, for example, if you take Black people in the States, the Black identity, a part of that really is the survivors of slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, racism, and all of the historical kind of injustice people face that were a part of that group of being Black, or Black people. And that forges a sense of identity by surviving that. But then what's interesting is, in a way, Jodi Dean does critique that too. I mean, she does say, yes, many of our identities, be the white working class or Black people, or in Australia, obviously the big trauma really is for Indigenous people and Aboriginal people, or even early migrants who faced racism, and even probably even current migrants, I don't know, that there is a place for forming a sense of personal identity through that survivorship. However, when it comes to political action, it has very little to do with your identity. It has very little to do with all of your whatever this historical survival created for you as an individual through whatever group you're a part of. I think that's a very subtle but perspicacious point she makes in the book. And then she goes on. And on the other hand, we have systems, processes operating at a scale so vast, so complex, that we have scarcely that we can scarcely conceive of them, let alone affect them. This book presents an alternative to both, and this is an important point here. I would also say, let me just add the comments bit too, in case people want to leave comments. I would also say, actually, no, that's going to be a bit distracting. I'll take that back off. I would also say this whole thing about systems, for me, it just beautiful. I mean, I work in tech, so I see this kind of, they call it systems thinking. It's important to a certain extent, but I think neoliberalism really does this thing where it tries to, in a way, replace subjectivity with systems, replace the subject, or the term the more colloquial term is individual, but I don't think individual and subject are the same thing. And really the most colloquial way to put it would be management and bureaucracy. How much of management there is in our current world, where there are all these consulting companies consulting on consultants and consulting on more consultants. And then there are people that are self-identified subject matter experts being consulted. And this whole vast network of management and bureaucracy created through capitalism, in a way, it's, as David Graeber put it, it's bullshit. It's meaningless, and it's a bit Kafkaesque. While at the same time, it is kind of an, it's a really interesting kind of paradox. It goes in tandem with this notion of identity politics and identities and survivors, along with this need to systematize everything and create these vast systems. And then for Jodi Dean, again, comradeship is something that's an alternative to that. These two tendencies correspond to neoliberal capitalism's dismantling of social institutions. So that's really important too. I mean, it's so interesting, right? Like, for example, all of these universities in Australia, we've got this happening right now, where because of how much neoliberalism has shaken up all of the more what I would call are the necessary and institutions that create deep social cohesion, but also kind of is a fabric of a society, from all the way from civil institutions to educational institutions like the universities. And as they're shaken up and as they're marketized, as they're kind of they become a part of this broader capitalist system or economic system, market system. And when they go awry, they outsource that to consultants. So you bring, the universities bring in consultants to consult, and, cost cutting, how can we get rid of staff? And because these institutions are being dismantled in front of our eyes, it's sort of like, as they're being dismantled, what replaces them is more meaningless bureaucratic systems and management and consultants. So it's kind of like, it's the only term I can think of is like, it's bizarre. And they're trying to find, so the solution, or what caused the problem, they think is the cure, but it's not. What caused the problem cannot be the cure. In this case, it's neoliberalism. And to the intensification of capitalism via networked, personalized digital media and information that I call communicative capitalism. More and more people are experiencing more and more economic uncertainty, insecurity, and instability. And this, again, is a part of what I meant by, the working class finding their identity, unfortunately, through nationalism and even kind of race nationalism or white nationalism in more, predominantly Western countries. And it's a part of how they survive, by clinging on to their identity, by clinging on to, be it Christian nationalism or some kind of existing identity, as they survive in the precarious economic times. Good jobs are hard to find and easy to lose. Fewer people can count on long-term employment or expect that benefits like quality healthcare and adequate provision for retirement will be a part of their compensation. Unions are smaller and weaker. Yes, this is again in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, where, I mean, in my view, a union is a vital part, a vital institution in our society for workers, and neoliberalism dismantled unions. And this creates more precarity for workers. Wages are stagnant, housing is unaffordable and inadequate. I would. Schools and universities face cuts to budgets and faculty, additions of administrators and students, astronomical tuition increases, more debt, and less respect. Pummeled by competition, debt, and the general dismantling of the remnants of public and infrastructure supports, families crumble. Neoliberal ideology glosses the situation as one where individuals have more choice and more opportunity to exercise personal responsibility. So I just want to make a little point on this families crumble a bit. I mean, Zizek makes this point really well. So it's really interesting. Conservatives or more right-wing people are really good at scapegoating people in the LGBTQ community, or like trans people or gay people, saying that, oh, they're destroying the nuclear family, gay people, just because gay people can get married, or just because trans people have rights. They're dismantling the nuclear family, which is a sacred institution of our society. But the irony is neoliberalism, and I would just say capitalism, really. Neoliberalism is like the more wanky term. Capitalism has done way more to dismantle families than any gay person or trans person. And we have like ample records of this through mostly economic uncertainty, through the anxiety and the psychological distress that our current system creates, and that the direct, immediate impact that has on families. And then, of course, when we are faced with these antagonisms, we want to scapegoat people, and ergo we find trans people or migrants or whoever. All right, this is an important bit, the Carl Schmitt bit. I really want to, actually, I probably won't discuss too much of the Carl Schmitt stuff, because there's like, frankly, it warrants a whole essay that I'm currently working on, which I'll probably get to end of the year. But that's me. Jodi says, Carl Schmitt famously characterized liberalism as replacing politics with ethics and economics. It's a good point. I do agree with that, even though he was a Nazi theoretician. Correlatively, we should note that displacement of politics specific to neoliberalism. That's true. There is individualized self-cultivation, self-management, self-reliance, self-absorption, and at the same time, impersonal determining processes, circuits, and systems. What a great point. I mean, this is where it comes in tandem, this notion of self-help, where there's a huge boom in self-help. Everyone's talking about, how can I improve myself? How can I be self-sufficient amidst the uncertainty and the kind of the overall existential angst around the world? Amidst that, we also have these huge management systems that I discussed earlier to try and counter the contradictions of capitalism, essentially. And so that's quite interesting how Carl Schmitt kind of makes this point too, although his solution is something a little bit more on the Nazi fascist side. We have responsible individuals who are responsibilized, treated as a loci of autonomous choices and decisions. And we have individuals encountering situations that are utterly determining and outside their control. Instead of ethics and economics, neoliberalism's displacement of politics manifest in the opposition between survivors and systems. The former struggle to persist in conditions of unlivability rather than to seize and transform these conditions. The latter are systems and hyper-objects determining us, often aesthetic objects or objects of a future aesthetics. Things to view and diagram and predict, perhaps even mourn, but not to affect. So this point here, again, I really have to, I'm probably repeating this point ad nauseum here. It's really interesting that the argument Jodi makes across the book is that people cling on to their identities as a sort of a coping mechanism. It's a way to survive amidst unlivable conditions. Ergo, most people that, I don't know if this is empirically true, so we have to figure out a way to measure this, but most people that do cling on to kind of these identitarian movements, be it generally now it's nationalism or even white nationalism, it is a coping mechanism because their own lives have gotten so precarious, their own lives have become so difficult to even acknowledge how bad it is, and they think that they can survive this by clinging on to some identity. And of course, the alternative of the Comrade is that we can change these conditions through political struggle. And that's what the book essentially puts forward, as have many communists. And then the other part, the notion of hyperobjects, I mean, look, I will just replace this hyperobject with like AGI, really, or like kind of what the AI was trying to do, where they're trying to, for a lot of people in Silicon Valley and the tech bros, AI, it kind of is it certainly has a religious element to it, but it's also seen as this, it's a salvation, or it's like a panacea where we might move to a post-work society, or you could outsource all of our what's this, cognitive effort or cognitive labor to the machine. With irony, though, is in fact, I probably should see if I could share that too. Let me see if I could share my screen here. There's an interesting share screen, Chrome tab window. Is it this one here? Oh, that's annoying. Why can't I share the Chrome tab? Doesn't matter. What I was going to show is, I'll figure that out later. I'm really new to StreamYard. What I was going to show is this idea, Harvard Business Review did this thing where how a lot of companies using Gen AI, that it's not as impactful or as effective as people thought it was, or as I guess some of these corporate leaders thought it was, or corporate, I don't want to call them leaders, managers thought it was. And a lot of the Gen AI is that the way it's being used in the workplace isn't as optimal as people thought it was supposed to be. So it's kind of like it's a bit of a fantasy that exists in people that are involved in this world, and in fact, there's some AI slop, and the Harvard Business Review article speaks of like even work slop, where Gen AI just creates this like meaningless, ostensibly top quality professional work, but it actually adds more work for employees and workers, and makes them more inefficient. So there are these interesting paradoxes where, and for me, that hyper object is kind of like AGI, where we wish we could sort of find the answer, find the panacea in this technology, and like outsource it to this big other, to use a Lacanian term. And then she continues, survivors experience their vulnerability. Some even come to cherish it, to derive their sense of self from being able to survive against all that is stacked against it. This is really important too, right? I mean, this probably even goes back to the point I was making about Black people, or even the working class, or even in Australia, indigenous people, where they find so much of their identity from this generational trauma that they've faced as indigenous people, and what happened to them when they were displaced. And that becomes a part of the identity, for better or worse, I should say. Sociologist Jennifer Silver interviewed a number of working class young adults in Massachusetts and Virginia. Many emphasized their self-reliance. They did so in part because their experience told them that other people were likely to continue to fail or betray them. To survive, they could count only on themselves. Some of the people described struggles with illness battles, and with addiction, and challenges with overcoming dysfunctional families and abusive relationships. For them, the fight to survive is the key feature of an identity imagined as dignified and heroic, because it has to produce itself by itself. It's just a great line, It's just, and this is again what I see where, look, I could probably replace this whole paragraph, which was beautifully written, with one term: hustle culture. Like, a big part of hustle culture is just, middle class, working class lads just wanting to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and sort of try and get over whatever problems they're facing, and kind of survive the difficulty of the economy right now, the inability to find jobs. I mean, I'm sure you've been seeing how New grads, for instance, are finding it virtually impossible to find work, and that's deeply disheartening when you hear young people straight out of uni not being able to find work, and then you're told to, I don't know, you're told to read How to Win Friends and Influence People or some stupid nonsense like that, or you're told you're told to enroll in some online course here, online course there, and then in a way, look, in a way, some people, and I think, unfortunately, at the current moment, it's mostly men that get drawn into some really dark movements, like far right movements or even neo-Nazi movements, and it's because all the answers given, all the kind of these band-aid solutions that are given to them, they mostly don't work, and then by them not working, they double down on it, and then in a way that becomes a part of their identity. So it's a bit of a paradox again, the idea that they try to survive, but by trying to survive and failing to survive, that failure itself becomes their identity. And that can lead, in my view, it can lead to two. It can lead to something what I would think is the right one, which is collective political struggle, which I think is the right way, as the book Comrade suggests. But the other one, which I think majority of people, unfortunately, are moving towards that, and it's quite dark, ergo I've become cynical about the current political situation, is fascism. It's fascism. It's some kind of or fascist adjacent kind of identity politics, which you see a lot from nationalism. Accounts of systems are typically devoid of survivors. Human lives don't matter. The presumption that so this is kind of what I meant by this notion of trying to replace subjectivity with systems, which neoliberalism obviously does. The presumption that matter is taken to be an epistemological failure or ontological crime in need of remedy. Bacteria and rocks, planetary or even galactic processes are what need to be taken into account, brought in to redirect thought away from anthropocentric hubris. When people appear, they are the problem, a planetary excess that needs to be curtailed, a destructive species run amok, the glitch of life. I have a lot to say about this notion of how the subject is always this entity that doesn't fit into the order of things, but I think I'll go on another tangent, and therefore I don't want to, go on an ADHD word salad here. So I'll just continue. The opposition between survivors and systems give us a left devoid of politics. Absolutely. Both tendencies render class struggle, the divisive struggle the divisive struggle over common conditions on behalf of an emancipatory egalitarian future, unintelligible. In the place of the political struggle of the proletarianized, we have the fragmenting assertion of particularity, of unique survival, an obsession with encroaching, unavoidable impossibility of survival. Politics is effaced in the impasse of individualized survivability under conditions of generalized non-survival of extinctions. So that's kind of a bit of how I think when the survival fails, there's this almost despondency that creates, and that could lead to a kind of like a post-humanist kind of thing or full-on fascism. However strong the survivors and systems tendencies may be on the contemporary left, our present setting still provides openings for politics. Correct, and that's kind of that point I made about the two options we really have in this chasm, or in this break. Here are the four. First, communicative capitalism is marked by the power of many, of number. Capitalist and state power emphasizes big data and the knowledge generated by finding correlations in enormous data sets. So yeah, kind of what the AGI thing, right? Okay, it's a fantasy. It's really important to understand that at like a symbolic level as like a fantasy of that this could be done. Social media is driven by the power of number. How many friends and followers, how many shares and retweets. On the streets and in the movements, we see further emphasis on number. The many who are rioting, demonstrating, occupying, blockading. Is that how it's pronounced? The word blockading? In any case, as over a century of working class struggle has demonstrated, the power of the people is in asserting the power that the many have over the few. If the people can get organized and join together enough to take struggle on. A second opening exists in identity losing its ability to ground or left politics. No political conclusions follow from the assertion of a specific identity. On the left, attributions of identity are being immediately complicated, critiqued, and even rejected as activists build commonalities across struggles. Now, I am a part of this left. I want to say that I do believe leftism, and I think Daniel Todd would agree with me completely. I mean, in fact, a lot of this I've learned through his talks and his lectures. It's a universal project. I mean, Todd McGovern was on the podcast. We discussed his book, Hegel After Emancipation, and he's very clear that leftism is always a universalist project for universal emancipation and universal struggle. And in fact, particularities or particularism is by definition a right-wing position. So all the way from nationalism to religious nationalism to identitarianism to identity politics, by definition, all of that is a right-wing phenomena, a right-wing position. As Jodi writes in the next sentence, advancing nationalisms throughout the world suggest that today identity is more likely to be appealed to by the right. Correct. I mean, if you look at just the recent anti-immigrant movements, or even more of the far-right movements here in Australia, but at a much larger scale in the UK and the US, and even in India, the huge nationalism issue, which Jodi writes about. Yet again, the right repeats its age-old tactic of stealing left themes and programs, Tucker Carlson, now forwarding an identity politics of its own. White supremacy in the United States, Brexit in the UK. Sorry, it's the water. Brexit in the UK, Hindu nationalism, and Israel's declaration that it is the nation state of the Jewish people are but a few examples. The third opening relates to the astronomical increase in demands on our attention that circulate in communicative capitalism, for which a series of communicative shortcuts have emerged. Hashtags, memes, emojis, and reactions, GIFs or GIFs or however the fuck you say it, as well as linguistic patterns optimized for search engines, lists, questions, indicators, hooks, and lures. These shortcuts point to the prominence of generic markers, common images and symbols that facilitate communicative flow, keeping circulation fluid. If you had to read, much less think about everything we share online, our social media networks would slow down and clog up. In this setting, the generic serves as a container for multiplicities, for incommunicable contents. Common symbols enable new connections between struggles. Common names let people understand their local issue as instances of something larger, something global. In the fourth opening, the movements themselves have come up against the limits of horizontality, individuality, and rhetorics of all allyship that presuppose fixed identities and intentions. So this whole the term allyship, so it's a very common thing to hear about, I'm an ally of LGBTQ folks, I'm an ally of migrants or refugees. I'm an ally of this and that. There's a great critique in the book, in the next section, which I won't get to in this stream, of Jodi Dean critiquing allyship from the perspective or the point of view of a comrade, and why true leftists should work towards being comrades and not particularly allies, because allies, it's again something to do with identity politics and being like a what's the term here, self-absorbed project, let's say, for lack of a better term, and rhetorics of allyship that presuppose fixed identities and interests. The response has been renewed interest in the politics of parties and questions of the party form, renewed emphasis on organizing the proletarianized many, cutting through and across the impasse of survivors and systems in a new turn toward the arrangements of the many, the institutions of the common, and the struggles of the exploited. This is the context in which I present a theory of the comrade. The comrade figures a political... So I really have to read this really slowly and carefully because it's really important for the rest of the book. This is the context. Against systems and survivors, I present a theory of the comrade. The comrade figures a political relation that shifts us away from preoccupations with survivors and systems, away from the suppositions of unique particularity. Sorry. Hold on. Gosh. I talk too much. And the impossibility of politics, and toward the sameness of those fighting on the same side. So this bit here is the universality that I was talking of in leftism. It draws out the demands. It draws out the demands and expectations of those engaged in emancipatory egalitarian political struggle. Comradeship engenders discipline, joy, courage, and enthusiasm, as I explore further in chapter 3. If the left is as committed to radical change as we claim, we have to be comrades. Beautiful book. I highly recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to discussing it with Daniel Todd next month. He certainly would have a lot deeper analysis of this book than I would. I hope I managed to at least get across this notion as to why Jodi Dean puts forward comrades or comradeship against what is in our zeitgeist, in our culture right now, in our times, which is survivors, i.e. identity politics, and systems, i.e. management, bureaucracy, consultants. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.